QB injuries? That was an early week problem. Now it's time to set our lineups, and the biggest questions lie in the backfield. Is the Seattle backfield just going to stay unpredictable all year? Is it finally time to start fading James Conner? And what the heck is up with these early round rookie running backs we all spent the summer getting excited about? We're going to dig into all that and more in an all new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to get you set for week 3 of the fantasy football season and potentially to help you strengthen your roster beyond that. We're talking trades. We're talking long-term outlooks for these players. We're going to focus primarily today on some big week 2 backfield shifts that could affect our week 3 lineups, could affect how we view these running backs the rest of the way. But first, let's dig into the offense coming off the most significant week 2 change. That is, of course, the Bengals, who lost Joe Burrow basically for the season. We'll see if he makes it back at some point in December, but especially for fantasy purposes, we got to treat it as though Joe Burrow is done for the season. That means Jake Browning taking over the Bengals offense, Jared. And before we get into what to do with him and other Bengals, I want to look back at what we actually saw, because the only reason that, most of us know who Jake Browning is because we already saw him start 7 games for the 2023 Bengals after Joe Burrow suffered that season-ending wrist injury. And we saw some good numbers from Browning and the offense over that span. I dug into them for this week's Trade Targets article. I'll talk a little bit later about why and for whom. But just like from an overview standpoint, those Bengals had 9 full games of Joe Burrow, 7 full games of Jake Browning. They scored 20.2 points per game with Burrow, 23.4 with Browning. They went from 302 yards per game with Burrow to 348 yards per game with Browning. Now, I'm not using those numbers to say, hey, this offense might be better with Jake Browning than with Joe Burrow. If anybody can remember 2023, you might remember that Joe Burrow started that year coming off the calf injury that cost him all of August. He aggravated it again in week 2, so he got off to a slow start. We were waiting for that Cincinnati offense to come around. It did just a little bit before he then suffered the wrist injury. So we never really got full Joe Burrow. But the point here is switching from Burrow to Browning is not going to kill this offense, which we kind of got into in the waiver wire show earlier this week.
Yeah, Browning completed 71.5% of his passes in those 7 starts, 8.2 yards per attempt. And T. Higgins missed 2 of those 7 games. Jamar Chase missed 1 of those 7 games. So he didn't even, have the full wide receiver core for all those games. So I think, that 7-game stretch was encouraging. I thought he played well enough in relief of Burrow. Browning in some ways reminds me of like a Jameis Winston or Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's not afraid to, sling it around, throw into tight windows. He knows he has these 2 good wide receivers. He's going to give them a chance to make plays. I'm pretty optimistic that this Bengals offense will still be good going forward. Obviously, all these guys take a hit without Joe Burrow, but I'm not panicking on this offense.
The Bengals clearly like Jake Browning. That was 2 years ago that he stepped in for a long stretch, and 2 years later, they still have him as the backup. They haven't tried to upgrade on Jake Browning, so they like him. And the kind of quarterback that you just mentioned is exactly what we want from a fill-in QB. We don't want a guy that's going to manage the game and take safe throws and, throw shorter. His ADOT was just the same as Burrow's when he was in the lineup before, so we should get similar attempts at performance. We're not expecting Joe Burrow level performance, but we should get similar play going forward. So with that in mind, let's start placing everybody for this week and beyond. Jared, they start at Minnesota. Hasn't been as tough a matchup through 2 weeks as it was last year, but still not the easiest spot for Jake Browning to start. So where are we ranking the fill-in quarterback for week 3?
Yeah, it's still a tricky spot. The Vikings have been dealing with injuries on defense. They're actually just 30th in Pro Football Focus coverage grade through 2 weeks. So, maybe it's a doable spot. I still think it's a tricky matchup, though. We know Brian Flores loves to blitz. He's on the road. The Bengals' implied total for week 3 is just 19.25 points. That's 27th on the week. So, I'm treating Browning as a, mid-range, low-end quarterback 2 this week. You shouldn't need to use him in 1 quarterback leagues, even with all these injuries we've been dealing with. I think Marcus Mariota is a much better fantasy play this week. But I do, as we've seen with Browning in 2023 and even saw last week, I think there's going to be spots this season where he jumps in to the top 12 and produces as a quarterback 1. figuring out when those are going to be might be tricky. But again, I do think he's going to have some spike weeks just because of how he plays and the weapons he has.
And we got a bad week from Michael Penix against Minnesota in week 2. We got a good outing from Caleb Williams fantasy-wise in week 1, helped by the rushing, but still scored plenty of points. So there's opportunity here. We'll see what Jake Browning does. I agree. QB2 range is the right place. You can use him in Superflex 2 quarterback. I certainly would hope that you have a better option for a 1 quarterback team. What about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, who will both be healthy this time at least?
Yeah, for now, and we'll obviously, continue to monitor Browning's play and how these receivers are used target share wise, but I'm treating Jamar Chase as like a mid-range wide receiver 1. So still a really strong fantasy asset, a must start. You're not benching him in any scenario, I don't think. T. Higgins to me is like a low end wide receiver 2, maybe high end wide receiver 3. I think Jamar Chase's target share might actually climb with Jake Browning. I just think you're going to get more like designed, schemed touches for Jamar Chase. And you look at even this year so far with obviously, Burrow for over half of the time so far for the Bengals. Jamar Chase has a 43% first read target share compared to T. Higgins' 23%. So the Bengals have already, been designing stuff much more for Jamar Chase than T. Higgins. You also look at average target depth. Jamar Chase at 9.3 yards, T. Higgins at 12.5 yards. So Chase getting, more of those shorter, easy completions. I expect that to continue. So I just think, again, I think Chase's volume might actually climb with Jake Browning. The efficiency is going to take a hit. The touchdowns probably take a hit, but I still think he's going to, dominate targets here. So that's going to keep him, as a really strong fantasy asset. And I think T. Higgins is just going to be more volatile, but we saw him make that impressive touchdown catch deep down the field in that game against the Jaguars. You're going to get more of that stuff, but I think his weekly floor is going to be quite a bit lower with Browning.
Yeah, I wouldn't panic on either wide receiver. We'll see exactly how they're deployed. It would make sense for the Bengals to try to make things easier for the backup quarterback in terms of decision-making on those plays like this, the specifically scheme touches that you were talking about. So I don't go selling Jamar Chase or T. Higgins this week because you're not going to find buyers that are excited about them coming off the Joe Burrow injury. I think stay patient, whether they're in your line, whether T. Higgins is in your lineup or not. Stay patient. Let's see what happens. I think maybe even the more interesting guy here is Chase Brown because he started a little bit slow production-wise, fantasy points-wise versus his usage, which has still been top 6 level at the position. And one other thing that changed with Jake Browning in the lineup back in 2023 was running back targets picked up both in total targets and in share of targets. That could fit into the same, area of making things easier for the quarterback, maybe scheming a few more running back targets in, maybe at least calling for quicker checkdowns. I don't know how much exactly goes into that kind of planning, but I do know that the running back targets picked up then. I do know that Chase Brown, even though he's ceding a little bit of work to Samaje Perine and not high level in running back target share right now, he's still leading the Bengals backfield in receiving, still has some upside in that area. I think he's a potential buy this week. He actually made it into our trade targets article as such. I think he's a buy because he's getting the high level usage that we were expecting, because he should score better if that usage holds. And, for all the reasons we talked about, I don't think that the offense dies because Jake Browning steps in for Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I would expect Brown's target volume to grow going forward. He has just 6 targets so far and a 9% target share. Now, as you said, Matt, part of that is due to him losing some routes to Samaje Perine. Brown's at a 45% route rate through 2 weeks. That's just 23rd among running backs. So maybe he's not going to get to the 14, 15% target share we thought was possible if he was really controlling all the backfield work. But I think he'll finish the season with higher than a 9% target share, especially with Browning under center now. Brown's snaps have been fine. He's 12th among running backs in snap rate, and he's 5th among running backs in expected PPR points per game. So the usage, in total has been really strong. Again, I think his weekly ceiling takes a hit just because the offense isn't going to be as good. But I still think just based on volume, I would consider Brown like a low end RB1 going forward. I think there's a decent chance you can trade for him for cheaper than that.
You can find the full case for buying Chase Brown in our trade targets article live on draftsharks.com right now, along with 5 other guys on either the buy or the sell side. Jared, a guy who did not make it into that article, but that we are probably going to have to start making decisions on here pretty soon, is Ashton Jeanty, who we expected to just, at the very least, instantly be a heavy workload guy. And we haven't even gotten that so far from the Raiders. What do we do with Ashton Jeanty right now and then even beyond that?
Yeah, multiple problems for Jeanty. The first, as you alluded to, and Jeanty did get workhorse usage in week 1. That was not the case in week 2. He lost passing down work to Zamir White and Dylan Laube. I did not have that happening at any point this season. Jeanty ran route on just 38% of Raiders pass plays in that week 2 loss to the Chargers. I think part of the problem has been that his pass protection has been bad. If you look at PFF pass blocking grades, Jeanty's 25th among 31 qualifying running backs in pass blocking grades. So he needs to prove more reliable there, I think, to get that passing down work back. The other issue has been rushing efficiency. He's averaging 2.7 yards per carry through 2 games. And part of that's on the offensive line, which we knew was not going to be great this year. They're currently 18th in PFF run blocking grades. They're dead last in adjusted line yards. But Jeanty hasn't been very good either. He is 49th among 50 qualifying running backs in rush yards over expected per attempt, negative 1.5 rush yards over expected per attempt. So that's basically saying an average running back would be averaging 1.5 more yards per carry than Jeanty has so far. He's also 39th among those 50 RBs in PFF rushing grade. I think eventually both these problems will go away. I don't think he's going to continue to be that inefficient, and I don't think he's going to continue to lose that much passing down work to Zamir White and Dylan Laube. So I think Jeanty will be okay. I think he'll still finish the season as a top 20 fantasy running back, maybe even top 12. I think it's still within his range of outcomes. He's probably not going to pay off the price you paid for him, though. And I do think, at least in the short term, I would consider him like an RB2. You're probably not benching him, but I don't think he's a top 12 running back play until, again, we see both of those things improve, the passing game usage and the efficiency.
And I think it's bad enough through 2 weeks that you can consider benching him this week, depending on who else you have. I'm not going out of my way to bench him, but I think it's quite possible I've got 2 better options for week 3 on my roster, even in a non-scary matchup with Washington. You mentioned the passing game issue. Obviously, what we see as fantasy managers and, just sensibly thinking about the draft cost for, paying that top 10 pick to get Ashton Jeanty, you see a franchise that has reason to put him on the field as much as possible, involve him in the offense as much as possible, but they are also trying to win games. So they don't have to force Ashton Jeanty into the lineup in all situations every week. If he's deficient in one area and they have somebody else that they think is going to be better in that area and help your team have a better chance to win, for that small sliver, at least for that week, then there's reason to keep playing it that way. So I don't think we should expect the Raiders coaches to immediately be like, what the heck are we doing given those touches or those opportunities, those snaps to these other running backs? We got to get those back to Jeanty this week. We got to get him going. Maybe, but it's not necessarily that case as, NFL coaches.
Yeah, and this is not the norm. If you look at the history of running backs that go as high as Ashton Jeanty did in the NFL draft, those guys almost always immediately see workhorse usage, and that continues throughout their rookie season. Maybe if they're not good as rookies, you see that tail off in year 2, but I'm still going to bet on history here, and just that, Jeanty before long is going to, be back to the workhorse. Again, he was a workhorse in week 1, but something happened in week 2, whether it was a plan coming in or him just struggling in pass pro early on where, that plan changed.
In a game where his whole team struggled, by the way. So that certainly might have played into it and just kind of thrown things off the track. So I agree. I'm going to go ahead and bet on him long-term. I think the work will come back. I think he'll be all right touch-wise, and then, we'll see what he can do production-wise beyond that. But he wouldn't be a buy low candidate for me just yet. Omarion Hampton was a guy we were hoping was going to bounce back in week 2. Things might have gotten worse for him, though, in that game. What do you think there, Jared?
Yeah, they did get worse. He lost playing time. Hampton's snaps sunk from 81% in week 1 to 63% in week 2. Also had a lower route rate in week 2. And really, similar story to Ashton Jeanty. So again, Hampton lost playing time, and his efficiency has also been bad. 3.1 yards per carry. He is 45th among those 50 running backs in rush yards over expected per attempt at negative 1.3. So he hasn't been very good either. And then you look at that week 2 game, Najee Harris got all 8 running back touches in the fourth quarter of that game. The only time Hampton briefly touched the ball was on that botched exchange with Justin Herbert, which resulted in a lost fumble for the Chargers. So I'm curious to see what this backfield looks like in week 3. I won't be surprised if it is again close to a 50-50 split, just with Hampton, kind of struggling out of the gate so far. So tough matchup against the Broncos for Hampton. He's below Jeanty pretty easily in our week 3 running back rankings. And I think Hampton is definitely someone you can consider sitting if you have other viable options.
Tough matchup. Also the kind of matchup where you might see the Chargers motivated to try to run the ball more with how good the secondary is for Denver. But I agree with you. Even more than with Jeanty, I'm trying pretty hard to sit Omarion Hampton this week so we can see what the usage looks like. See if Jim Harbaugh's like, we're going to go back to the rookie to try to keep his confidence up. Or if he's like, man, you were not doing it through the first 2 weeks, and Najee Harris is a pro, so we're going to split things and we'll let you kind of ease your way back in. I don't know what it's going to be. We'll see if there's any signal ahead of the game, but I would sure like to not use Hampton this week. I just said I wouldn't go buy low on Jeanty. I'm certainly not chasing Hampton right now, but I think if you have a really good roster, if you're really strong at running back, you already have starters set, or at least if you're in a league that plays, 2 to 3 flex positions, so you have a larger lineup that can cover gaps, that's the kind of team where maybe you could go see how little you could pay to get Jeanty or Hampton right now, when there's really, no silver lining to say, this is why this guy's going to break out this week. I think those are the situations where I could see trying to buy either of these rookie running backs and just banking on at least a second half rebound this year.
Yeah, and I would rather go buy Jeanty right now. And the reason for that is I think Najee Harris is just a bigger threat than Zamir White or Dylan Laube are, to Jeanty to continue to steal these touches season long. Now, Hampton, the thing working in his favor is just the offense, right? The Chargers offense is way better than the Raiders. So like if he regains that workhorse role, Hampton's upside might be higher, but I believe more in Jeanty being a workhorse for at least most of the rest of the season.
You can find more about those guys, those situations, and lots of other important situations for your fantasy lineup in Jared's weekly usage takeaways article that posts every Wednesday live on the site right now. You can find a link in the show notes for this show below. Jared, another rookie running back we got to talk about, another early round guy, and it's TreVeyon Henderson. And I mean, none of these 3 guys has done anything exciting through the first 3 weeks. I think the situation for Henderson might even be more alarming than for Jeanty or Hampton. What about you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, Henderson hasn't come close to getting a role good enough to, where we could trust him in fantasy lineup, right? And Henderson, like Hampton and Jeanty, his role went backwards in week 2. His snap rate fell from 34% in week 1 to 29% in week 2. And that was because the Patriots decided they had to get Antonio Gibson involved in the game, which honestly, Gibson was good last year. So I'm not even going to say it was like a horrible decision. I still think Henderson deserves more touches, but Gibson was good last year. Ramondre Stevenson looked good in this game, the best I've seen him look in a while. So I don't think he's going away anytime soon. So Henderson, I would definitely try to bench if you have any other viable options that you think you're going to get 10 plus touches in week 3. I think you're trying to bench Henderson for now.
The thing that makes this especially more alarming for me is Ramondre Stevenson. There's already a highly paid running back in this backfield. He's making $9 million a year. Antonio Gibson's not on a tiny contract either, on a multi-year deal. They kept him around. So there's reason for the Patriots to be patient with TreVeyon Henderson if they think he's deficient in areas that are hurting the offense right now. They definitely don't need to force him into work with those 2 other guys around. So I think if you've got TreVeyon Henderson right now, you definitely have to be patient. You got to try to start somebody over him, and you might have to try to acquire another running back to start over him if you don't have 2 better options. I would try not to trade away Henderson right now because you're not going to find him much more lowly valued than he is at this moment, but I would not count on him over the next couple weeks. And, within that, we'll cross our fingers and hope that something changes to meaningfully update that outlook.
Yeah, closer to a buy than a sell for me, even because I just still believe in this player, and I do think it will probably take until the second half of the season before it happens, but I do still think he's going to capture a big enough role this season where we can use him in fantasy lineups. It's just he doesn't seem anywhere close to getting there at this point.
We've been mostly negative on the running back so far, so let's go positive for a minute. Is Ken Walker back after his week 2? Ken
Walker, the player, is definitely back. He was one of, if not the most impressive running backs in the NFL in week 2, 13 carries for 105 yards and a score, 4.7 yards after contact per attempt. 4.7 yards per attempt is a good number. He did that just after contact. Now, the Ken Walker usage we want is not back yet because the usage stayed basically the same as it was in week 1. Zach Charbonnet actually played more snaps, ran more pass routes, and had more carries than Ken Walker did in week 2. Now, Charbonnet got nothing going. Walker was awesome. So got to imagine we start to see this shift at least a little bit. Mike McDonald did say afterwards that he wants to keep this rotation in play, right? And I do believe that to some extent, just because we know that, the Seahawks, as we expected, have been one of the run heaviest offenses in the NFL so far. We know Ken Walker's injury history. They probably don't want to give him all the work going forward. But after what we saw in week 2, I have to believe that Walker will at least be, the 1A in this committee going forward.
Of course, we saw kind of the opposite in week 1. So maybe Seattle's like, yeah, this is why we're running them like this, because sometimes one guy has a really good game. Sometimes the other guy has a really good game, and we like them both, and we'll keep them both fresh all season. After week 1, we did not want to overrate the usage. After week 2, I think the important factor is to not overrate the production. And we just kind of have to wait and see. At this moment, we've got to expect Seattle to keep splitting things between them. And, I really think that there's lots of potential for this to just be a frustrating backfield all year. I might consider selling Ken Walker this week, depending on whether somebody comes calling for him specifically, what I have in the backfield. I think it's going to take an injury to one of these guys to make either one the clear backfield leader over the other.
Yeah, I'm a bit more optimistic. Like, I think if Walker can claim, say, like 60% of this backfield, I think he can at least be like a low end RB2 just with how good he is. And again, how much the Seahawks want to run the football. Charbonnet, by the way, did not practice on Wednesday with a foot issue, which is ironic because it was Ken Walker dealing with the foot issue throughout August. So we'll see about that. I mean, if Charbonnet misses this game or any game, Walker instantly becomes a top 12 fantasy back.
Yeah, and same thing in the other direction.
Yep.
So I'm certainly not saying get rid of Walker for whatever you can, but maybe if somebody is like, hey, I need a running back, and sends you something for Ken Walker, at least consider it. Don't consider him untouchable. Jared, should I worry about James Conner?
Yeah, at least to an extent. He is has lost passing down work to Trey Benson. Trey Benson played basically all the passing down snaps in week 2, the third down stuff, the 2-minute drill stuff. Benson ran 55% of the routes in week 2 to James Conner's 41%. Now, Conner's still controlling early down work. He played 71% of the early down snaps in week 2, got 79% of the running back carries. That was even a higher percentage than he got in week 1. So he is still the clear early down back here. Still looks good to me, but Trey Benson has looked good too. So I kind of expect this arrangement to continue. And that's a big deal. Just look at James Conner last year. 46% of his PPR production came from his receiving numbers last year. Now, again, he's not obviously losing all of that, but he might be losing, half of it, a third of it. And that's going to hurt. So Conner to me, like a low end RB2 at this point, where we kind of thought he could be, a high end RB2 when he was healthy this season. I think you downgrade him to like low end running back 2 going forward.
The Cardinals don't have tons of talent on offense. That's one of the things that makes Trey McBride so attractive. It's one of the things that makes it easy, that made it easier to bet on a Marvin Harrison Jr. turnaround this year. Trey Benson can add to that talent. So the Cardinals don't need to adhere to Conner's contract and say, oh, we're paying him this much. We're going to keep running him just as much as we did in the past. He's going to keep all of these opportunities to himself. It's more reasonable for them to lighten the load for Conner if Trey Benson is performing well and proving to be helpful for the offense. So as frustrating as it is, I agree. The Cardinals have reason to keep Trey Benson involved, and I think that we should expect a bit less work for James Conner. Doesn't necessarily mean that you go sell him right now because he's about to crash, but, be ready for a bit more frustration in terms of how much work he gets week to week.
Yeah, the Cardinals have also remained pass leaning early this season. And I say remained because over the final third of last year, they made a pretty big shift from a run leaning offense to a pass leaning offense. That's continued early this year, which again, that obviously hurts Conner if he's, only getting those early down carries.
Also seems kind of goofy when you have a quarterback who's not very good. Yeah. And I think collectively your backfield is better than your wide receiver core.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we'll see if it lasts. It's just 2 games. Maybe it was a matchup thing. But at least so far they've been, in the top half of the league in terms of pass rate and stuff.
Have we already seen the Giants backfield flipped, just a little bit after we got Jordan Raanan saying, oh, it's definitely Tyrone Tracy. Is it now suddenly definitely Cam Skattebo?
I don't think definitely yet, but I think most likely that Skattebo is going to, if I had to bet, I would bet on Skattebo leading this backfield in basically all categories for the rest of the season. Skattebo even last week ended up leading the Giants backfield in snaps, pass routes, and carries. That gap in snaps between Skattebo and Tracy even grew in the second half and overtime of that game. And Skattebo's just clearly been the better runner so far. He is easily beating Tyrone Tracy in yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced per attempt, PFF rushing grade. So I think it's going to be Skattebo going forward. Brian Daboll, after that loss to the Cowboys, called it like a game by game situation, kind of a hot hand thing. They also have a really rough spot this week as big underdogs to the Chiefs, who have remained tough against the run so far. So I would try to not use either Skattebo or Tracy this week, but I think Skattebo could be a buy even if he disappoints in this game against the Chiefs, because I do think he has a chance to be at least an RB3 or flex play the rest of the season.
It's probably a credit to Brian Daboll that he tends to lean after games to not giving you a knee-jerk reaction and saying, yeah, we're changing our backfield, or yeah, I'm going to play Jackson Dart. The other factor at play here that's different from a lot of other NFL teams, Brian Daboll and GM Joe Schoen are sitting at 0-2 after going 3-14 last year, after going 6-11 the year before that. These guys are on the hottest seats anywhere. And I think that position makes quick changes in your personnel more viable, more worthwhile. Like if you're sitting in that position as a coach, you're like, all right, it looks like this guy's working. We got to go with this guy more, because I mean, at this point, your job is probably depending on something delivering optimism to your bosses.
Yeah, Skattebo's just more fun too. He is just such a fun watch. Like every carry is a car crash. I don't know how long it's going to last for him, but as long as it does, he's a fun player, and I do think he can be efficient. He's already the team's clear goal line back. I think he's gotten every carry inside the 5-yard line for the Giants so far. So he could be a fun fantasy player if Russell Wilson or Jackson Dart can make this at least a decent offense.
Yeah, just make sure that you don't overrate the situation behind that rough offensive line. This still hasn't gotten Andrew Thomas back, but will at some point at left tackle. And make sure that you keep the second running back, whoever that proves to be, rostered, because neither of these guys is a sure bet to stay healthy throughout. Jared, where does Travis Hunter belong in the week 3 ranks after a week 2 that was a little disappointing versus his start?
Yeah, I already hate having to rank Travis Hunter every week. And we talked about this in the summer, that he was just going to be a better pick in best ball, because projecting his route rate and therefore his target share every week is just going to be tough, and we've already seen it. Hunter ran a route on 82% of the pass plays in week 1. That was down to 60% in week 2. That's a huge drop. Like 82% is like you can feel good about this guy in your starting lineup. 60% is you do not want this guy in your starting lineup. And he did play more defense in week 2, as we heard would be the case. Maybe we just trust what we hear, because we heard in week 1 he was going to play a lot of offense. We heard heading into week 2 that he was going to play more defense. That both have come to fruition. The other thing here too is that one of the Jags starting corners, Jerrion Jones, he left that week 2 game with a back injury, and after that, Hunter basically took over as a full-time player on defense. So even heading into this week, like Jerrion Jones's status, it's so funny talking about this stuff with a wide receiver, but Jerrion Jones's status might have a big impact on how Hunter plays in this game. Jones was a limited participant in Wednesday's practice. So it sounds like he has a chance to play in week 3, but that's definitely something you're going to want to keep an eye on if you're considering starting Hunter this week.
I think that we're just going to have to be ready for Travis Hunter to be unpredictable, probably at least for half the season, at least until we get enough games to show any sort of trend. But it's going to be tough for me to put him anywhere beyond like the bottom of wide receiver 3 range.
Yep, exactly.
Let's close this out. I mentioned the trade targets article earlier. Whether it's somebody from that article or somebody else that you wish were in that article, Jared, who is one player that you are buying or selling this week?
Yeah, I am buying Chris Olave this week. Olave leads all wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game so far. Now, he's been the biggest underachiever at the position. I think he's sitting 34th in actual PPR points. But that to me just makes him an easy buy heading into week 3. Kellen Moore is doing his Kellen Moore stuff for this Saints offense. The Saints are first in offensive pace, seconds per snap. So they're playing at a fast pace. They're 7th in total offensive plays, and they're 4th in pass attempts. So there's a lot of plays, a lot of pass volume to go around here. Olave has seen 28.8% of Saints targets so far. That's 9th most among wide receivers. He sits 3rd among wide receivers in total targets. So the volume has been awesome. And Spencer Rattler has not been a disaster. He's averaging just 5.3 yards per pass attempt, but he's completed 65% of his passes. He ranks 10th among quarterbacks in PFF passing grade. So he's been serviceable. If Olave stays healthy, that's the big thing for him, and continues getting this type of volume, he's going to be much more productive than he has been so far.
For that, I will say I like Olave more as a target if you start 3+ wide receivers than if you only start 2, because it's going to be tough to rely on a Saints wide receiver. And I'll also say maybe this is like a 2-week buy call, where I wouldn't be at all surprised if the whole New Orleans passing game struggles at Seattle this week, but certainly long term, for all the reasons you laid out, there's plenty of upside to Chris Olave.
For sure, yeah. And, if Rattler does start to struggle, they do have Tyler Shuck, who, is at least another option.
If you are looking to buy Chris Olave this week, you could consider trying to sell Ladd McConkey, potentially for Chris Olave plus another piece. I'm doing at least a price check on McConkey this week. He was a second-round pick, maybe very early third-rounder at draft time. I thought he was overpriced at that point for really just the reason that I'm not excited about him right now. He finished last season as wide receiver 29 in expected PPR points per game. That usage picked up as the season went on, but still finished overall in that mid to low wide receiver 3 range. And it's even down from that this year for a couple of reasons. Keenan Allen's back and drawing targets at a higher rate per route than anyone else on the team, including McConkey. Quentin Johnston is better for the second straight season. The pass rate is high. The Chargers are throwing more often than any other team in the league, 69% in neutral situations through 2 games, according to rbsdm.com. That number is going to come down at least a little bit. The Bengals led the league in that category the past 3 years. They topped out over that span at 65.6%. So even if the Chargers stay at the top of the league, it's coming down by at least a few percentage points. That higher volume is going to help everybody in the passing game, but I think the crowd is going to keep McConkey from, even if he retakes the team target lead, I think it's going to be more like a Terry McLaurin team target lead as opposed to a true number 1 wide receiver level share of targets. So I'm not fire selling McConkey. I'm not scared that the bottom's falling out and then just dumping him for whatever I can get, but I am going to go ahead and do a price check, see if I can get him for my draft price before anything falls further. And if it doesn't work, then I'll just hang on to him for now and then maybe try again after he scores his first touchdown of the season.
Yeah, I'm fine with a price check on McConkey. And if I can get, top 12 wide receiver value in return for him, it's definitely something I would consider. Keenan Allen's definitely a problem for him. Keenan Allen just draws targets wherever he goes. He's still a good receiver. He has the, rapport from the past with Justin Herbert. That's obviously carried over into the start of this season. I do still think, though, that Ladd McConkey is the best receiver on that team and that he will lead the team in targets and that this will remain a pass-leaning offense and a good passing game. So, to me, if you get 22, 23% of the targets for Ladd McConkey, I think he's still easily going to be a top 20 fantasy wide receiver with, upside, into the top 15, top 12. So I think Ladd's going to be fine. I'm with you, though, Matt. If you can get that late round 2-ish value in return, I do think I would trade him because I don't think he's going to be quite that valuable going forward.
You can find everything you need to set your lineup for week 3 and set your team up for the rest of the season at draftsharks.com. Week 3 rankings, of course, available across formats. Your team intel page is ready with lineup recommendations specific to your team and your format. The trade navigator is ready to help you find a trade partner and evaluate trade offers. And the free agent finder is ready to help you with every team, every position, every format. Even if you only play Dynasty, Shane's got a pair of new articles on draftsharks.com just for you right now. So whatever you play, wherever you play, you can trust Draft Sharks to be your unfair advantage.